Say hello to Lou. Hello, Lou.
Hey, Norma. Good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Okay.
I have to ask you how I am.
Where am I?
I know how you are.
How am I terrible?
And, you know, I fear that you actually mean it.
Where am I? How am I?
Louis,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to pop out a couple of times because there's a workman coming and I just have to give him a brief. So I'm going to disappear and reappear. Hopefully it'll be resolved in the next 10 minutes, but
Yeah, likely stories.
Very nice. I'm out.
Okay. So we sent around a couple of
I don't know what to do, honey. Oh,
pieces. And I think one of them we can get a good kind of grip on today. Let's look at, is it The Girl with the Flaxen Hair? Is that the translated title?
yep.
Just picking a performance for us to listen to. Here we go. Okay. I'm just looking one thing up. Let me read to you some things that this fellow who wrote an interesting book, Paul Roberts, about the piano music of Debussy wrote. He is talking about gamelan music. Do you guys know what gamelan music is? Hang on. Here's another example. To another example.
So, Louis, I'm sorry. This is an example of,
Gamelan music.
uh-huh.
This is the music that Debussy, Ravel, Satie heard at that exhibition. See in the back here, there's larger plates creating that lower tone.
1889, Claude Debussy heard a small Javanese ensemble at the Paris World's Fair. He was struck by the floating, hypnotic sounds he heard and incorporated scales and rhythms from the music into the foundation of Impressionism, especially in his compositions for piano. A half-century later, John Cage incorporated even more of the gamelan into his piano music. The prepared piano uses bits of metal, rubber, and wood, carefully placed between the strings to create a more rhythmic and percussive sound.
Okay, so this writer makes a point of saying, for a pianist to experience at close quarters the delicate hammer and mallet technique required to draw out the sound of the gamelan instruments, is to begin to understand the kind of tone that Debussy required from the piano. There's a pentatonic quality to some Asian music, and we know what the pentatonic scale is, and Debussy uses it. It relates, but not exactly, to a 5-note scale called the slendro of the gamelan. And so part of The Girl with the Flaxen Hair just hints at the sonority of gamelan music. Those kind of cradled gongs that were sitting all in a row, they look almost like tops, right? He makes a point of saying, as we shall see later in this chapter, the phenomenon of overtones on the piano is explored in Debussy in ways which his predecessors only touched on. We shall also see that this phenomenon lies at the heart of the gamelan. Do you guys understand what that refers to when we talk about overtones? Debussy starts writing more conscious of the overtones that notes on the piano are going to create, and combinations of overtones through the combinations of simultaneous notes. So what is certain is that in 1889, Debussy heard the Javanese gamelan played by the finest exponents of the art, and that for him, it was an unforgettable experience. Beauty of sound is only one aspect of Javanese music. It also weaves a complex polyphony. We heard there were simultaneous ideas going on at once. Debussy observed this polyphony makes Palestrina seem like child's play. And it requires from piano players the kind of formidable skill that might make Liszt's piano playing seem like child play. Yet an Indonesian musician in an overall ensemble reveres the instruments more than the instrumentalists. So part of Debussy's piano style was trying to capture the flavor of what we just heard in gamelan music. It opened a new doorway for him in 1889. This writer says, in Javanese music, he recognized a musical ideal that was attainable through his own explorations of piano sonority. And that Debussy's piano style is fundamentally percussive, This might seem a paradox considering his mastery of delicate nuance and understatement, but it's also a truism. The tradition inherited by Debussy from the Romantic piano composers, with them, the piano was made to imitate either an orchestra, creating an illusion of the articulation and attack of sustaining instruments, or imitate the sound and legato phrasing of a vocal technique known as bel canto, beautiful song, the Italian singing style. Debussy often does not require the piano to sing in this sense, and rarely does he imitate an orchestra. Unlike Bartók, who exploits the percussive nature of the piano through rhythm and accents, articulated the moment the hammer hits the string, Debussy explores the resonances created after the impact of the hammer as the sounds are dying away. One of the remarkable features of gamelan music is the way it shows us that percussion is a phenomenon of resonance as much as accentuation. As Debussy wrote, if you listen without European prejudice to the charm of their percussion, you have to admit that ours is no more than the primitive noises of a traveling circus. And again, by our standards, we would think this is terrifically syncopated and that the time signature is changing a lot and that there are dualities of different groups organizing the beats differently. President. It's remarkable music. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that Steve Reich studied this, because if you heard something like that in a contemporary music concert, you would think it was as modern as could be. So Debussy finds a way to free himself from European assumption about what the piano should sound like and how to write for it, And you could see the resonance of those instruments, those bells, they don't diminish in sound quickly like the piano. So sounds can accumulate. And that's Debussy tries to explore ways for the resonance, the ringing brilliance and atmosphere of that to get transferred or realized in his own way on the piano. So with that in mind, I thought that that is a valuable thing for us, because if we look at Debussy, even if we look at Ravel, and to not at some point check in with this is a very large miss. Let me read to you what he says specifically about the girl with the flaxen hair. He said, I believe this is the 8th prelude in book 1, with the two before that, Des Pas sur la Neige, and the one that follows. He said, with the 6th prelude, we begin a group of 3 that acts as the central arch of the whole structure of book 1. So 6, 7, and 8. No other preludes of the first book are more dramatically contrasted than these 3. Here we have a triptych representing what we might see as crisis, catharsis, and redemption. Or in terms of the sensibility of music, desolation, violence, and tenderness. And then he goes on to say specifically about the girl with the flaxen hair. He said it's usually described as charming, and that it expresses in context a repose and a delicacy of expression far more profound than the usual epithet implies. The emotional transformation it embodies is underscored by a remarkable musical one. The pentatonic innocence of the opening phrase of the piece is a precise melodic rendering of the heavily accented dissonant harmony of the last 2 measures of the previous prelude. So to hear these preludes out of context, the girl with the flaxen hair, he asserts, makes one impression. To hear it in context, he asserts, makes another impression. So why don't we take him up on the idea and let's hear it in context. Let's hear the 6th, 7th, and 8th. Okay, so we can use this. You guys see this score here?
Yeah.
So we can use that since you don't have necessarily the preludes in front of you. The translations here are Prelude 6, Footsteps in the Snow, Prelude 7, What the West Wind Has Seen, and Prelude 8, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. If you're finding this too quiet, you have to raise the volume on your computer because it is very quiet. We know that about Debussy. I think he rather brilliantly evokes a kind of barren, frozen, desolate landscape with that two-figure ostinato, da 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 da, right? there are a lot of techniques that we've already even seen in that, but harmonically it's thoroughly ambiguous. Also, not in terms of what the chords are, but where do you feel a sense of home, and yet it begins and it ends clearly in D. And the other thing that I'll just say about it before we listen to the next one is that Debussy published these with the title at the end of the piece. So he didn't want you listening to the piece with a preconceived programmatic notion. So that's the first of three. Here's the second. So much for Debussy as someone who just writes beautiful, lovely music, right? So we've gone from a kind of desolation to a violence. That's a good description. And then Now, if we want to put the sunken cathedral in context, the next prelude is titled The Interrupted Serenade. And it's a small cameo, kind of flavor of modern life, Spanish and Parisian. The form is very collage-like. So it actually explores kind of harmonic, musical discontinuity. And what it really is a foil to set you up for the sunken cathedral. So let's listen. Ooh, sorry. a second theme enters. First theme of the movement.
Who was the performer there?
Christian Zimmerman.
Okay.
This author says, in its descriptive intentions, the sunken cathedral suggests a story. It is perhaps the nearest Debussy ever came to program music, music that's trying to communicate some story. The title comes from an ancient Breton legend, which relates to the tragedy of a drowned city and how its cathedral at certain times of the year rises from the sea at dawn. The prelude evokes the misty waters, the sound of the cathedral bells, the plain chant of the liturgical prayers, and the awe inspired by those who've experienced the supernatural, yet the tale is only a pretext for a piano piece, a structure from which music can evolve. And to approach such music only in terms of a narrative or a pictorial image is like trying to understand Shakespeare by translating his poetry into prose. Questions, guys? So what I hope we've thus far accomplished today is the idea that if we look at the girl with the flaxen hair, out of context, it seems to be one of Debussy's pretty pieces, his charming pieces, not so different from, in terms of that emotional character, from Reverie or even Claire de Lune. But in context, the way we hear it completely changes. It's not just charming, it's a moment of tenderness, of relief, of now there's a melancholy to it that seems richer, perhaps even than out of context, when we might just hear it as something that we describe as pretty. And personally, as a composer, I could tell you that the least interesting comment anyone could ever get about a piece of music is, oh, that was pretty. Pretty, you know. To me, it's like, oh, you bought a new dress. That's pretty, you know.
She has a
Or,
nice personality.
yeah,
For a
yeah,
date.
pretty. What is pretty? Pretty is, you know. So let us take a look, start looking at this piece. And the first thing we're going to want to do is number the measures. So the second line, measure 5. Third line, measure 10. Fourth line, measure 14. Fifth line, measure 17. Everybody in agreement? Top of the next page, measure 20. Next line, 23. Next line, 27. 31. 35.
I think the second to the last line is 32.
Oh yeah, did I screw that up?
Yeah, there are 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until after 27. There's 5 on that line.
It's interesting. I'm looking at an edition where that's not the case. But yes, I see that that is actually the case with the edition that all of us are looking at. That's the only discrepancy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's look at it formally. Let's just get a superficial, formal understanding of it. Okay. Here we go. All right, so where are we formally thus far, guys? Well, we've got our main theme right at the beginning, measure 1. We could just call that small a, right? La dee da 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 dee da 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 dee 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 da da da. 4 measures. Then the pickup to the next measure begins what we could call the consequent phrase of the tune, right? La da dee na na so interesting. Doesn't feel like it, but it's really 2. No, it's not. That's why it doesn't feel like it. It's a 3-measure consequent phrase, right? You guys agree?
Mhm.
So before we even go any farther, do you feel the time? Do you have any idea when you're listening to that that's in 3/4 time? Not looking at it, listening to it. I don't. If anything, I'm hearing this opening note that sounds like it's suspended in midair. And then as if there was a fermata over it. Then it sounds almost like 3/4. Ba dee da 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 da. I mean 2/4. La dee da da ba da dee da 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 dee da 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 da. You understand?
Yep.
Do you guys agree? Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it feels 2/4, but it's not. And that opening held note tied over immediately creates an ambiguity. And then at the very end of this phrase, where we hear, so it feels almost like lop that off Ba dee da 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 da. That's a group of 2. Ba dee da 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 da. That's a group of 2. Da 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 dee da da. That's a group of 2. Da. That's 2. But suddenly now there's 2 more. No, and then you get da da, and now it all breaks down. So we have seen this before with Debussy and Clair de Lune, how time seems suspended. Time is not clarified. It's intentionally, as a matter of fact, blurred. You know, if we hear it that way, this feels like the second half of a 2/4 measure, but it's really the beginning, right? So, okay, noted. Now, if this is the consequent phrase, let's pick that up. Well, I'll go back to the beginning. One, two. All right. Well, there we are. We still don't have any real sense of time, do we? He's free with the beat, and he's free with any sense of meter. All right. Now it seems to me like what happens over here with this pickup, that's a return of the theme. So that's, if it's a song form, that's A repeated. Looks the same, right? But what's different?
There's harmony with it this time.
That's right. Now it's harmonized. So it's being expressed through a particular harmony. And then we also want to see, when we listen to it, does the harmony help us hear the time or not? Let's listen. Not really, right?
Right.
All right. Now, this feels like an extra measure, an extension, and yet it's not really an extension. What it is measure 4, you know, the end of measure 3 and measure 4 now with this added in, right? This decorative connective fill. All right. Now, what about this? How do we think of this? Well, it's reversing direction from the original, yet the original is also hinted at here, but it's going up instead of down to start the phrase. To me, this is a bridge. All right, so that's an interesting resolution, a resolution into E flat major there. We're picking up this run up. Echo. That's a beautiful melodic idea. I remember when I first looked at this, I thought of it kind of as a closing phrase, starting there at 22. So this, if we think of this as the bridge starting at 12, and it gets that echo. So instead of an 8 measure phrase, it's a 10 measure phrase. And then maybe something that we could just, acknowledge as closing. It feels like it's closing the section. Then in measure 24, or with the pickup to it, what happens? So what is that? Do you recognize it? Let's go back and listen to it one more time. Here, now, now.
Oh, yeah.
So let's stop there. What is that? Does it relate to anything we've heard before?
Variation on the beginning.
Yeah, I think so. I think da dee da da, right?
Right.
Well, instead of on the D, started on the B, da da, and you're getting da da da. Here, watch where I'm pointing. La da 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 da
Oh,
da 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 da. And so that's obviously an extension. So this is the main theme, now harmonized in a completely different way, and all these parallel fourths and fifths, which would have been absolutely verboten in his school, but also evoking that same, notice that's how he evoked that sunken cathedral quality, this something old, almost medieval. So the main theme is varied in this chordal manner, and most important, the rhythm is varied too. He's largely flattened out to straight eighth notes. And then it concludes its variation, and we come back to there. And that's more of a rehearing, isn't it?
Mhm.
But what's different?
The last measure, the rhythm in the last.
Okay, what else?
It's higher.
Say that again.
Octave higher.
Yes. Mm-hmm. What else?
The chords underneath.
That's right. Now it's harmonically. Very different than it was in measure 5, 6, 7, 8, which of course is different than it was in the beginning when there was no harmony at all,
Mhm.
right? And then he seems to skip the first couple of measures of what we'd call the bridge, because he also altered the end of the tune a bit, and he jumps to that phrase that we first heard at 14. Here. So harmonically, we've got 6 flats in this piece. Where are we?
G, sorry, G flat.
Yeah. And in the beginning, it feels totally G flat pentatonic, doesn't it?
Well, actually, because it's E flat minor, the first chord, I think, if I got it right. If it wasn't clear whether it was E flat minor or G flat.
Right.
Where?
In the very beginning, isn't that E flat 7? Minor, E flat minor 7?
Yeah, but it's G flat. It feels like just pentatonic. There's home.
Yeah, in the third measure.
Right,
is
and,
home.
and he proves it to you with the third measure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So if we look at this, we'll come back to kind of the key melodic motives, which I think you can see. It all seems to be about thirds for the most part. Right?
Mhm.
You know, right at the beginning, another third, G flat, another third, right? And then here, back another third, and then even this, another third. And suddenly here, a fourth. So the fourth now becomes a secondary motive. So we'll look a little harder melodically, but that's gets us started. And so we're saying that harmonically, that the piece is telling us at the outset that it's in G flat major. But do take note that it is pentatonic.
Mhm.
There, at the beginning, there's no F natural leading you up to a G flat. You know, there's no 5 chord in those opening measures. Now, if we quickly analyze the harmony starting at measure 3, we therefore call it a what? A 1 chord, wouldn't we?
Yep.
With the F and the E as passing tones.
Mhm.
And now you get that E flat, and we're back in the Debussy, Ravel, Satie world of, you know, maybe we should just think of that as a 6th.
And in measure 5?
4,
4.
that pickup.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then harmonically, what's going on in measure 5? The downbeat is what?
D flat.
A
D
D
flat.
flat. And the and of 2.
B flat minor.
Yeah, looks like that's a quick passing thing, right? Notice that also means that the bass follows that minor third.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the 3rd beat, we land on what?
E flat minor.
Mm-hmm. And on the 4th beat,
G flat.
all right. And now we have to ask ourselves, are we modulating? Are we modulating to E flat with that D natural and the G natural, making it E flat major, not minor?
Mm.
So
Yes.
let's listen.
Yes.
Here we go. Well, I'd have to say no, but there sure is certain emphasis on it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not like a place that we hang around.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's a wonderful surprise. So if we acknowledge the chords in measure 6, we hear the downbeat as another D flat chord, right?
Yes.
And then instead of going to B flat minor, he makes it B flat major. And then instead of going to E flat minor, he makes it E flat major. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's put this, since we've looked ahead and said, well, we're still in G flat. So let's put this in context. Beginning of measure 5, what is a D flat chord in this key?
5.
5. In the B flat minor?
3.
Right. And the E flat minor?
6,
And the G flat?
1,
The D flat is 5 again. And now what do we call the B flat major?
I called it
5.
capital 5 of 6.
5 of the 6 major.
Right.
Yeah.
But you call it 5 of 6. That's right. And it goes to 6 major.
Also interesting, they unlike the other piece, they're all in the root position.
Right. That's right. Makes it sound more folk-like, simpler.
You know, it has a
Goes
Dvorak,
with that tune.
like Dvorak feel to me.
I think it's because of the folk character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it feels like it's an old folk tune.
Yeah.
All right. Then at the beginning of measure 8, suddenly the G flat has become G flat 7.
Right.
So that means what?
It's a dominant 7. 5.
1/2.
Right, 5/2 of
C.
C flat. Not C,
Right. C flat.
right? Because it's G flat. So he surprises us. Because where does he go?
5/4.
Goes to. Yeah.
Well,
Where did, he goes to A flat.
A flat 7
Maybe 7.
in third inversion. So we can't call it 2. We'd think of it really as 5/2 of 5, because it's the dominant of D flat. But it doesn't go there. That's not how it's functioning.
Yeah.
It's functioning almost like a Lydian 2, meaning the raised fourth in the key, Lydian. You get the chord for color, but not in a traditional harmonic functioning. And then it goes back to the G flat 7 and back to the A flat 7 again, always in the most unstable, what's it called? Inversions, right? So David, there goes your purity of everything in root position. And the last beat looks like 2 chords. The downbeat would be
E flat minor.
7,
7.
and the last eighth note, I think that
It's D flat 7.
right, it's D flat 7, but the G,
7, 9.
well, yeah, the G flat and the E flat resist giving you the third.
Yeah.
They hold out. But if there's any question that that's a D flat 7 chord, you just look at the next measure and it resolves to where?
G 1.
G flat.
G flat.
Okay. So what do we call this A flat chord? You know, is it 5 of 5? Well, you know, in the big picture, it is trying to get you to 5, and it will at the end of measure 9. Right? You got to pass through a 2 very quickly first, but
Which A flat are you talking about now? In which measure?
well, measure 9,
8 and 9.
which repeats measure 8,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And also, we do need to call that D flat 9 at the end because that E flat is holding over.
Doesn't it also have an 11?
It does, but in that case, it gets off it so quickly, it feels almost like an appoggiatura,
Okay.
seeking the F. But my point is, the A flat 7 with G flat on the bottom, in its own indirect way, is seeking the D flat, which it will find at the end of measure 9. And then we resolve. All right. Carry on. Just dig into this as much as you can. When you start to analyze measure 24, everything's moving parallel. But there are parallel chords that are being created. So see what you come up with. And we'll finish this next week. And I'll see you then. Okay?
We have 2 more classes, is that right, Louis?
I don't know. I think we may have 3. Isn't this our 4th week?
It is our 4th week.
And I think it's a 7. I'm checking, but I think it's a 7 class semester. So hold on. Yeah, we have 3 more.
Okay,
June 24, July 1st, and July 8th.
okay.
All
Cool.
right, guys?
Okay.
So I hope we're getting a broader perspective of Debussy by looking at all the other preludes. And everything we're looking at is part of Preludes Book 1. In case you're interested. Both of the books, all 24 preludes, obviously kind of a tip of the hat to Chopin, who was tipping his hat to Bach, are worth certainly getting to know. You don't have to study everyone intensely, but it's worth listening, and some of them are just marvelous. All right, see you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.